We love movies with Gordon Hayden.
Now, I mentioned earlier on how Mission Impossible Fallout is released in cinemas next week. This is the 6th installment in the series. Stateside, it's been getting great reviews. I think we're all taken aback here, film critics-wise, about just how stellar some of the reviews have been, like 5 stars. But we'll review the movie on next week's show. But we thought it's time for a bit of a recap, and our way of recapping the series today is to go from the worst to the best. And joining me now to go through the films that have been released in the series so far is Andy McCarroll. Andy, just before we get into it, when Tom Cruise was announced that he had gotten the rights to Mission Impossible back in the mid-90s, I couldn't help but think this was Cruise trying to make an American version of James Bond.
Yeah, that's very much how it felt, but it felt like this was going to be a one-off. Like, this wasn't something that kind of lended itself to a franchise. And Tom Cruise, kind of at the time, he's done very little sequels. The Mission Impossible series seems to be the only ones he's gone for. Of course, now he's back in the midst with Top Gun. But at the time, this was kind of seen as very much a one-off, and it was kind of the Bond version that was going on, one that kind of lend itself then to the more serious films like The Bourne Identity and things like that. But I think the first Mission Impossible and that particular kind of gets overlooked as the godfather of people trying to re-establish or reinvent James Bond.
Well, do you know what? We'll get into the first film in further detail in your list, because as I mentioned, we're going to go from the worst films in the series right up to the best so far. And in at number 5, Andy, is Mission Impossible 2, and that really is no surprise. Why?
Yeah, to be honest, I really enjoyed Mission Impossible 2. I know kind of this is the one that traditionally gets the kick in. It's the John Woo Dove film, but it's still an entertaining action film. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. Like, even that fight scene at the end where the two of them catapult themselves off motorbikes that pass each other, but then in the next scene the motorbike somehow jump through the air and explode. It's very much kind of its time, that face off high concept action film. But to me, I think, it's something that really established the Mission Impossible franchise. Something it done differently. The fact that it was so different from the first film, and I think that's to be applauded in a way. Like, Tom Cruise very much had it set in his mind. This is going to be, each film is going to be like an anthology series where you're kind of not going to follow on from the last film, and they're going to be kind of self-encapsulated stories, which I thought was a very brave, very profitable as it turned out as the film. I think it's still the most profitable of the Mission Impossible films. Two little bits of trivia in regards to this. This is the only Mission Impossible film where he actually gets a mission, accepts it, and follows through. Every other film he goes rogue.
That's interesting. Okay, so that's the first bit of trivia.
And the second is Dougray Scott, who plays the bad guy in Mission Impossible 2, had actually been cast as Wolverine in the X-Men film. But because John Woo needed to do reshoots for Mission Impossible 2, he had to drop out of that. The role ended up going to Hugh Jackman, and I'd say every day from that day to this, Dougray Scott looks at a picture of John Woo and curses his name.
Oh, I'd say he does. How his career could have changed, because the last thing I saw Dougray Scott in was Taken 3. So, yeah, very different paths old Dougray has had.
He's doing good.
yeah. That's how he cries himself to sleep at night. But also with Mission Impossible 2, this was the last film where it was just Tom Cruise front and centre. Because, Andy, we move on now to number 4 in your list, and it's Mission Impossible 3. And J.J. Abrams was brought on board to direct this because Tom Cruise wanted a different director with each film. And it was the Alias TV series that made Cruise really sit up and take notice of JJ. But JJ wanted to get back to what Mission Impossible was all about, a team.
Yeah, and there was such a big gap as well between the films. Like, I think what was Mission Impossible 2 was the year 2000, and this wasn't until 2006. Initially, David Fincher was actually brought on, and he had a script for the film where it was going to be Kenneth Branagh was going to play the villain, and Scarlett Johansson was going to be the female lead in it. This is what kind of led to the rumours that Tom Cruise had auditioned her for, to be his girlfriend, but it turned out it was actually for the Mission Impossible film that fell apart. And like I said, this is the one that kind of introduces the concept of the team. Ving Rhames returned as Luther. We had Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, Kerry Russell, Maggie Q, and Simon Pegg in a role that was originally offered to Ricky Gervais. They come in, you can kind of feel like this is the first one where it's not just Tom Cruise, and they're fully fleshed out. It's not, you see these kind of team movies where, there is, obviously Tom Cruise is still very much front and center in these films, but they're actually fully formed, fully fleshed out characters. And I think that's something that he really kind of picked up the ball and ran with for the rest of the films. And this as well, for me, it's the best villain of the series as well. Philip Seymour Hoffman absolutely chews the scenery in this film. He is absolutely fantastic in this. And that's why, I think Mission Impossible 3 gets a lot of praise. But I think if you take Philip Seymour Hoffman out of that film and just based on the story alone, it's not a great story. And even little silly little things at the end, the suitcase opens and the MacGuffin goes rolling through. It just seems a bit kind of mission convenient at times rather than Mission Impossible.
Now let us move on to the third film in your best to worst list. We're talking Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. So they've dropped now the numeral side of things. They brought on Brad Bird, who has been riding high with Pixar. He's had huge success, Oscar-winning success. Now he's gone into live action mode. Was it a bit of a gamble bringing on Brad Bird?
I think it was, but I think Cruise really has a great eye for talent. I think you could see the likes of the first film with Brian De Palma, obviously who was already very much an established director, John Woo as well, and even for the likes of Mission Impossible 3, J.J. Abrams, that was his first feature film. David Fincher was lined up for that, and I think with Brad Bird, he really saw coming off the back of The Incredibles and all the things with Pixar, this is a guy who's going to do something special. And this was essentially a kind of a reboot of or a soft reboot of the series as well. Like there was again another huge gap between Mission Impossible 3 and Ghost Protocol, and I think this one again he really kind of hammers home the team. Jeremy Renner joined. Jeremy Renner was kind of rumored to be as with every Jeremy Renner film, with the Bourne franchise and with the Avengers, he's kind of brought on and he's going to have his own spin-off, and then for reasons unknown, he kind of never seems to get that elusive spin-off that he seeks.
Yeah, because I just really think that Jeremy Renner is always third banana. Like, he's never really, I would see him, there's leading man. I see it in him. He just has a bit of a pug face. I just kind of think he really is more of a character actor than anything else.
I think he's kind of a very underrated comic actor as well. I think we saw this year with Tag. He was very, very good in that. And even in this film, there's a great scene where he has to do the jump wearing the magnet suit, and he keeps putting it off, and he's stopping, and he's doing these really elaborate stretches, and it's very, very funny. But again, it's not something you'd look at and think, yeah, he's my leading action hero that I want front and center.
Now, Andy, we're going to move into your top two. In at number 2 is the 1996 film Mission Impossible. The first film, as you mentioned there as well, that Brian De Palma directed this. It would be, I suppose, Andy, if you were to look at all of the films, this one could be looked at as probably the most adult film. And there was some criticism that when it came out, that the plot to it was nearly too convoluted.
Yeah, and I think that was a result of, kind of too many cooks here. When you look at the talent you have involved, you have Brian De Palma, who, of course, he's done Scarface, you have Steven Zagan, who's an Oscar-winning writer, David Cope, who wrote the Indiana Jones films, and Robert Downey, who wrote Chinatown, of all things. When you have people like that trying to, write their own script, they're trying to one-up each other and make it as, as elaborate and as interwoven as possible. It can get a bit kind of messy. I think it is kind of the underrated film of the series as well. I think looking back, I've rewatched all of the films in the last week and a half or so. It still really holds up, and just you said there in 1996. It's crazy to think this series is 22 years old. And the action scenes, you still remember that that iconic image of him coming through the server room of the CIA with the bead of sweat dropping on the floor. The helicopter action scene, the water feature during the restaurant scene. There's so many iconic moments in that film, and it really, really holds up. And we spoke earlier about this being, the kind of the American James Bond. This really sets the tone for that. They didn't really have, a globe-trotting spy franchise, and I think this paved the way for the likes of the Bourne films, as we spoke earlier. And I really think this was, the kick that James Bond needed to kind of look up your game. Yeah,
well, you think about how this film even starts. Spoiler alert for those that haven't seen the first Mission Impossible movie, but essentially all of Tom Cruise's, Ethan Hunt's colleagues get killed off. So he is in sort of rogue mode to a degree. And you kind of go, yeah, Cruise, you definitely want to be the American James Bond. The last film in our list, for those that haven't really been paying attention, well, let's do a quick recap. In at number 5, we had Mission Impossible 2. Number 4 was Mission Impossible 3. Moving on to number 3 was Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which was the 4th installment. In at number 2, we had the first Mission Impossible film. But in at number 1, we have the 5th installment, Rogue Nation. Christopher McQuarrie was the director on this one, Andy. He has also gone on to helm Fallout, which is out in cinemas next week. And Cruise and him seem to have developed a very strong partnership. Christopher McQuarrie came in and did some rewrites on Edge of Tomorrow. He, of course, helmed Tom Cruise in Jack Reacher. So there's a bond there, there's a trust there. But also, he's a director that hasn't really been tested when it comes to big action, though.
No, and we spoke there about Tom Cruise kind of having this eye for talent. Christopher McQuarrie wrote the Usual Suspects. He directed a film, I think it was 2000, called The Way of the Gun with Ryan Phillippe and Benicio del Toro. Very good film, but kind of, came and went. There was no real call for him to do anything else. And he's not someone who you'd look at and think, Tom Cruise saw something in him that I don't think anyone else did, and I think it really paid off. Like Rogue Nation, like when in a series do you see the fifth film being the best one? I think they really hit their stride with this one. They get the right mix of the action, the comedy. Everyone in it is absolutely fantastic. They've nailed the tone of this. Tom Cruise doing these, really elaborate stunts, and this is kind of, what started with Ghost Protocol when you see him scaling the side of the world's largest building. Here again, holding onto a plane for dear life, and really doing the stunt. This was the one that kind of, Tom Cruise stunt feature became very much a selling point, as we saw with Fallout as well on Graham Norton, where he broke his ankle doing one of the stunts. But this for me is just absolute goofy smile on your face, pure entertainment. There's a scene in this film with Alec Baldwin where he kind of is explaining how Ethan Hunt is going to come into the room and he's going to attack them. And he gives this speech and he describes Hunt as the manifestation of destiny. And it's basically Jack Donaghy in 30 Rock. It's just tongue planted so far in his cheek. I don't know how he's delivering the lines, but it's absolutely fantastic. I don't think I've had as much fun in a cinema as I had in Rogue Nation. It's like that speech, I was nearly punching the air in the cinema. It was just, this is what I want. It's just pure entertainment.
Well, Alec Baldwin, he'll be back for the next one, Mission Impossible Fallout. It is still hard to believe, though, Andy, that this series, it has been getting better. And it seems that if all going well, there'll be a seventh.
Yeah, it's interesting that Christopher McQuarrie is the first director to kind of come back for a second film as well. Jeremy Renner, who we spoke about, being the, trying to hand the franchise over to him, he's not back for this one because he got scheduling difficulties with the Avengers. Henry Cavill has come in and it seems like he's going to be, the next anointed one to try and hand the franchise over to. It'd be an interesting direction to see where it goes. Like Tom Cruise can't lead this on forever, but I think, if you're doing 8 Mission Impossible films, you don't need to hand it over to anyone else. Just, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is just let it go out on a high note and don't run it into the ground with, lesser films.
Very true. Andy McCarroll, thank you so much.
And that's the end of that chapter.